So as an entrepreneur, there's probably a lie that you tell yourself every single day, and that is working harder will lead to more success. This sounds great on paper, and it's what a lot of people believe and say, but the reality is that sacrificing everything for the grind completely blinds you to the systems, accountability, and leadership that's needed to scale, all while robbing you of your most important asset, which is time. In this video, I'll break down the way that this lie subtly disrupts every action you take as a business owner. By the end, you'll have a clear framework for how to build a sustainable business that can stand the test of time. Because the moment your business depends on how hard you work, it quietly stops being able to grow or sell. If this is resonating with you, please take a second to like the video and subscribe. That really does help this video reach other owners who are stuck in the grind. And if you want the practical side of this or a resource to help you do this, I have a download that's called How to Accomplish More Without Doing More. And that breaks down how leaders can shift from effort to leverage. The link to that is in the description. All right, so working hard is often very important at the beginning of a business, but if it lasts or stays part of your primary process for making something happen for more than the startup phase of your business or certain points where you're moving up to another level, then you've really lost the plot. What typically happens is you start to create a ceiling for yourself that you can't get past, and that ceiling is based entirely on your capacity to handle complexity or effort or your energy or your time. But at a certain point, you've only got so much of all of those things, and then you don't have any more. And so you'll find that you're not going to be able to grow past a certain point if it's all just hustle and grind mentality. Unfortunately, that is where most entrepreneurs, where most owners get stuck, is thinking, I have got to do it. If I'm not the one who does this, it's not going to get done. Now that ties into a lot of identity and psychology, which I'm not going to get into in this video, but I do want to talk a little bit about what you do need to do that will help you break through that kind of jam up of your own energy. So as an analogy, hopefully this helps a little bit. I practice Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So if you're not familiar with it, if you've ever watched MMA or UFC, Jiu-Jitsu is what people do after they get done punching each other and slapping each other, and then they fall to the ground and start rolling around and hugging. That's the Jiu-Jitsu part, is on the ground mostly. And that's what I practice. It's a grappling martial art. The thing about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, it was originally designed or shaped so that the smaller, weaker opponent would be able to survive or possibly beat the stronger, bigger opponent. The concepts in that then is that strength and power and effort and grind, not necessary, but they actually can end up being detrimental to your skill development and your advancement in the martial art, which is very much based on how do you use leverage, how do you use the other person's momentum, how do you use their weight to your advantage. That same basic concept is really critical to growing an organization. There's only so far that you can go using your ability to get up and grind. At a certain point, you will hit a maximum. It's different for different people, but there's a certain point where you just can't get past it. And you actually, if you want to go past it, have to learn to do things differently. Let me illustrate for you what this looks like. So let's imagine that there's some growth steps in a business. A lot of times people think of growth as a curve, nice gentle curve where you just add 10% revenue every year. That doesn't happen. Nobody experiences that. That's not a real thing. What really does happen is you have a significant growth jump. So here's the first thing, is getting to $1 million. Only 6% of businesses in the United States will ever make the jump from $0 to $1 million in revenue. That means 94% are somewhere between 0 and $1 million. These are all the little tiny businesses. And so if you already are doing more than $1 million, you're in the top 6% of businesses in the United States. All of the businesses. Big deal. Then if you want to jump to $10 million, that puts you in the top 1%, 1.1% to be precise, of all the businesses, if you want to get up here. Then if you want to jump to $50 million, that puts you in the top 0.25%, so 1/4%. Then if you go all the way to 100 million, here's the interesting thing, 0.18% make it to there. So you see that very few businesses even make it to 10 million in revenue, and essentially almost none make it past that. But here's the thing I want to point out to you is the difference between 0 and 1 is massive. It's a huge place where the pack starts to separate out. And then there's another major separation between 1 and 10 million. And then you have another fairly large, but it's not even as significant of a separation, 10 and 50. But the difference between 50, which is 1/4%, and 100 million, which is 0.18%, so it's almost 1/5%, is not that much of a difference. Here's the lesson from that, is that this space here, like most businesses, just to get to $1 million in revenue is its own significant thing. And you can do that through grind alone. But to bridge this gap between 10 and $50 million in revenue, you've got to give up the grind. And the companies that do this well, and they do it gracefully, and they're able to sustain it, build a leadership team, they build the kinds of systems and structures, and they build a culture which helps hold the entire company together so that it can continue growing successfully. That's why if you've made it to $50 million in revenue a year, the ability to get to 100 is not that big of a deal. This is less of a challenge, $50 million in growth. This kind of doubling is less of a challenge than any of these. That's what I experience with my clients as we scale up. This is not that hard of a step. And it's because at this point, if you're sustainably at 50 million, you've built this leadership team and you know how to do that in a management structure. You know how to put your systems and structures. You've built a playbook for your business. You've got policies down and processes, your P&P manual, your SOPs, whatever you want to call it. You've built that so people understand your recipes for success, and you've built a culture that's aligned around your values. If you do those things, you'll have the structure that you need to get you there. Getting from here to there requires those 3 elements of your leadership team, your culture, and your structure. Let me illustrate how that works here, because there's some important concepts in that. So you have your leadership, we'll just call it your leadership and management team. Just do LM for short. And then you'll have your structure and culture. Now, here's the thing about these, is these are self-reinforcing. I want to explain this. Typically what happens is if you have, it's a L and an M, leadership and management team. If you've built a strong leadership and management team, they, just by their actions and their priorities, will create your culture and at least an informal structure. If you want them to be aligned and to operate and do things the same way, in a predictable way, in a reliable way, so that if you go to manager A and you ask how to do something, you're going to get the same answers when you go to manager B. You need to have defined structure. You need to have your SOPs written. You need to have your policies written so that you get the same answers on that. Those 2 things create the skeleton, so to speak, that hold up your culture. Culture is an agreement around what our values are and how we make decisions together and how we behave or relate to each other. That's a way of defining culture. And so when that culture is, in a sense, codified and everybody understands what it is, it starts to hold the leadership team together. When they start to wander off or get distracted, culture will pull it back. Culture will also cause an appropriate amount of pushback or guidance if your structure starts to move in a direction that violates the culture. And so if you start to become overly bureaucratic in a way and it starts to squeeze out something that's important to you, your culture will push back on that and say, no, we don't think that's a good process or a good procedure to have in place or a good policy to have in place. And so if these things are all healthy and active, they become a very powerful foundation for your company that will allow it to grow. So let's say you have a couple of different people. So you've got happy owner right here working by his or herself, trying to make everything happen. They realize, I've got success, I've got things going on, I need to bring in somebody that's new. And so they hire a couple of people to help manage. So they got these people right here who are helping manage. And they're realizing, man, I'm repeating everything a couple of times. This is kind of difficult. And so what you want to do is you start writing down your structure. So these are your SOPs or your playbook or your policies and procedures, whatever you want to call it. You start to write it down so that you don't have to keep repeating things all of the time for everybody. Additionally, when you hire somebody new, one of these managers knows exactly how you want things to be done, and they can train the new person in precisely the same way you want it to be done because it's written down without having to include you. Now, when that structure is defined by your culture, which comes from your values, as they're translated into how decisions are made and what behaviors are acceptable or expected, then your structure reinforces those values, or it tells people, here's how we express these company values as it relates to onboarding, as it relates to hiring, as it relates to customer interactions or disciplinary processes or whatever, how we take care of equipment or the facilities. You can translate all of that through your SOPs or your P&Ps. What tends to happen is as this team grows and you get more layers underneath it and you have more happy people down here doing their things, as you're starting to develop all of this, you're going to naturally build a culture. This culture already was formed here. The owner already gave a culture just through their priorities and what was important to them. And they learned that, and through the way the three of those folks interacted, they're already going to form a sense of, here's how we do things around here. Now, what happens is if you want this to work well, as a company grows, you don't want the culture to be accidental all the way across, because right here we've only got a total of 9 people involved in this little tiny company. But let's say you had 19 or 90 people. Now it starts to become too big to be able to individually teach everybody how you do things. So writing it down helps, but being very clear about your values and reinforcing and teaching people how to stay aligned with those values helps them all work together in the same way, in a similar way. And along with doing all of this, you're just naturally building this management team that is in alignment with your values. Part of with your leadership and management team, as you're hiring and recruiting people, not only are you teaching them how to work in alignment with your values, how to be consistent with your SOPs, you also are hiring and recruiting for people who naturally are in alignment with your values. One of the biggest mistakes that you can make is to bring somebody into your team because you're desperate to hire them and they really are not in alignment with your values. That is going to cause so many problems downstream, guaranteed. So the clearer you are about here's who we are and here's how we do business, the easier it is for you to know who's the right people on our team, how do we define our culture to them, and how do we create structure that helps us all know how to work together well. If you do those things, then your effort level will go way down. The work you have to put into to make a successful $1 million company is usually very, very high. The work you need to put into to make a successful $10 million company may also be very high, depending on whether or not you've started to adapt these things into your processes or not. You're probably never going to make it to 50 million unless you introduce this into your organization. There are exceptions to this. I'm working with a turnaround company that had grown to $100 million a year in revenue, didn't really have any of this in place. It was very poorly led. That whole leadership team is gone now, but they were losing $30 million a year. It was awful. And it was just due to really poor leadership, very undelegated leadership. There was really almost no structure at all. Personally, I've never seen a company that large that had that little structure holding it together. And its culture was very toxic and very unhealthy. Not unsurprising, the company collapsed in on itself. It couldn't support the weight of that. They were able to get the work in for a brief period of time, but they couldn't perform it. And then that's created a bunch of downstream problems. That company now has shrunk back down to about $50 million a year in revenue. And at that point, we're going to rebuild all of these things that needed to be in place the first time so that it can get back to its 9-figure revenue place that it was before. And I think it'll be able to do that pretty quickly because the new leadership team understands these dynamics and these perspectives. And so I think that within the next year or two, I think we'll be able to get back to where they ought to be. So people without systems create inconsistency. You start to get confusion. This department does things differently than that department. This team operates differently than that team, and you get problems within the organization. Systems that don't have values or culture create compliance, but they don't really create a sense of ownership. There isn't a sense of we, there's a sense of I have to do this to check the box or not get in trouble. Culture without good leadership just tends to decay into slogans. It becomes just stuff that's on the wall. People have to actually champion the culture to make it work. So hopefully that's a helpful perspective on how all of this fits together. The other thought on this is, as an entrepreneur, you want to begin building these things before you need them. Now, you don't have to build out a massive P&P manual. In fact, it doesn't make sense. If you have a company of 9 people, you probably don't need that much to be written down. Let's say you're running a little a janitorial business, and you're not going to write down that much if you only have 9 people right now. You might have a basic manual for how to enter a building, a client's building, and how to leave. Maybe you've got a checklist for how you onboard people, what people need to be trained in. Maybe you've got some materials or equipment checklists or some basic things like that. You don't need that much. But once you get to 19 people and they're being managed by 2 or 3 folks, you're going to want to begin to define, what does clean look like? What does done look like? When do you start? How do you deal with time off? All these different questions that you keep getting asked that suck up all your time answering it. You want to have that stuff written down so people can just look up the answer, or somebody on your management team can define it. It is very stressful to try to answer these questions in the moment and to try to build your structure after you've already needed it for a while. What I recommend is, when you sit down at the beginning of a year, or you can do this at any point in a year, just look ahead 12, 18 months. What's likely coming down the pike, so to speak? What preparation will make that easier for us to handle? What new policies, procedures do we need to have in place? What work do we need to do around culture? How does the leadership team either need to be built or expanded or better supported so that they can be protectors and carriers of our culture and our standards or structure? Now you know that working harder isn't always the answer. Sustainable growth takes more than just time management or delegation or effort. It demands a shift in how you lead. Because at some point, scaling a business means stepping fully into the CEO role out of the doer role, and that role's a different game than building a company from the ground up. That's why I made another video showing you the key shifts that most founders miss and how to avoid the mistakes that wreck momentum. You can watch that right here.